So our first speaker today is Professor Joe Howe. He is the Executive Director and Professor of Energy at University of Chester. Joe's background is in geography and planning, environmental science and environmental engineering. He has extensive experience in working interchangeably with industry on major environmental projects and initiatives across the UK and overseas. And Joe is driven by the opportunities afforded by the industrial decarbonisation agenda and is currently academic lead on a number of UKRI funded industrial decarbonisation projects. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about those in a moment. Joe also has a particular passion for STEM skills and supply chain development, working closely with the Department for Education on this agenda, and he's also board member and trustee of the Arm's Length Engineering Construction Industries Training Board, or ECITB. Some of you may know of that. He's also on the advisory group of the Department for Education's Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. So Joe's really well placed for this event this morning. So I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to Joe. Kat, if you can share slides for me, please.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. That was fabulous. Well, here was going to be my introduction, and Vicky. Sorry? Can people hear me? Ah, fabulous. Yes. So Vicky's given me a very kind introduction. That's basically what I was going to say in terms of giving you an overview of my background. The top half of this slide, colleagues, that's my academic background. I don't want to go through them in any great detail. Kat's already mentioned that I'm a board member of the ECITB, where I'm responsible for skills and qualifications in the UK in relation to engineering construction. And I'm one of the external advisors to the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education, particularly around the decarbonisation, industrial decarbonisation agenda. Elsewhere, I'm the academic lead on the Decarbonised Gas Alliance. And I do work for all of these bodies towards the bottom of this, not least the Hydrogen Advisory Council, where I've been leading on the skills agenda with them. Next slide, please. So colleagues, this morning's focus is really about industrial decarbonisation, and I thought you might like to look at this slide to give you some kind of context of the current emissions within the UK around the various sectors associated with greenhouse emissions. And as you can see from this, that my focus is that 21% around industry. But what I'm thinking about in relation to Shrewsbury and Shropshire and Cheshire, and then going over into the West Midlands, is not just the industrial piece. And I know you're going to have a nice presentation later on today about some of the work going on in the West Midlands around industry, but also these other areas as well, because I do think they're all related, particularly Shropshire, agriculture, forestry and land use, 24% of emissions coming from that particular sector. Electricity and heat production. No doubt we've all had some heating on, or some lights, or fridges going, or cooking this morning in around the UK. We'll have centres, and we'll be the centre lead for the northwest of England. And in this, what we will be doing at the University of Chester is leading on the UK Industrial Decarbonisation Workforce Plan. So looking at all of the various projects which are being currently being brought together under cluster plans, and you'll hear some more about the West Midlands cluster plan later on today, looking at the work that's in those, looking at the propositions around net zero that are coming up across the UK, and then doing a very detailed mine into the skills that are required to realise and deliver on that. Now, there may be a need for new skill sets there. There may well be a need for employees to get a slightly slight retrain, or there might be a need for people to actually get a completely new degree programme. I suspect it'll be a bit of both, to be honest with you, but the government, through its 16+ education reform agenda, is very much equipping itself to ensure that employers get the skills that they require into the future, or have that opportunity. The second project that we're very much involved with is the Northwest Cluster Plan. As I mentioned, you're going to hear more about the West Midlands Cluster Plan later this morning. But the Net Zero Cluster Plan, you can see the various companies, bodies, organisations that are involved in that here. Our remit is to look at the net zero projects and consider the net zero projects required between now and 2050, look at the various companies that are coming up with propositions around them, look at the technologies that will be required to deliver on them, and then for us, looking at the skills requirements that are required to realize those opportunities. And then finally, we're the academic leads on the Northwest Industrial Decarbonisation Deployment Proposition. It's called HyNet. Brings together a lot of the major industries within the local area. It's being choreographed and coordinated by a company called Progressive Energy. Thornton Science Park, we're the consortium host on this, and we're leading on the economic impact study and workforce plan for this particular project. Our first economic impact study will be coming out from this project later in the summer. And our work here is also to integrate the work with the deployment proposition with the IDRIC and with the cluster plan to make sure that we have this joined up dimension. You'll see on this right-hand side, the HyNet logo. Bottom left-hand side of that is jobs and skills. That's what we are leading on. The proposition is around hydrogen and it's around carbon capture. It's at the moment primarily concerned with linking together the major companies in the Northwest, but over time through the cluster plan, I'm anticipating a roadmap being rolled out where we will link into a number of the other organizations and industries in the area, some of the industrial parks in the area, etc., to capture emissions and actually begin to ensure that we're either utilizing those emissions or storing those emissions. The hydrogen production facilities, there's going to be major hydrogen production facilities in the Northwest. That hydrogen will go into the local distribution network and some into the national grid. Within 5 or 6 years, we will be consuming hydrogen as part of a blend within our homes and within our businesses. This is the future. This is the direction of travel. But I want to make sure, or we want to make sure, that businesses and industry are aware of the opportunities, both in terms of technology and certainly have the skills that they require to deliver on this. Next slide, please. So I've already gone into some of this already on the left-hand side, colleagues. I mentioned the education reform agenda. This is a frightening picture of Gavin Williamson, our Secretary of State, and the FE reform white paper, which the Queen mentioned in her speech. This is going to come forward very quickly through Parliament to be enacted. And this is where there will be significant funding opportunities for businesses. We're going to see a transition in government thinking around training, a real push on the apprenticeship levy and support for business. There's going to be a lot of money made available. The government's already talking about £2.5 billion being available for skills and support for the delivery of this particular white paper, or act as it will be. It's already getting local businesses to work together across the country around local skills improvement plans and encouraging proposals for the development of college business centres around this. Beyond that, the government is also beginning to consider funding to be available for intensive skills boot camps for companies, collaborative companies, to ensure, and this is quoted from the white paper, to ensure that the entire focus of skills training in the UK is employer-led. It's a significant shift and significant change. In the past, I think colleges of further education, universities have just generally put on fairly generic programs, fairly generic courses. And it's great that parents and students are prepared to pay for that. But in the future, the government's going to incentivise people to do training with support from industry by putting funding into their pockets to ensure that skills is provided, bespoke skills are provided to employers. So you can see on the left-hand side of this, a whole series of different things that the government is focusing on. Slight shift away from degree programmes, more to level 4, level 5 programs to ensure skills are in place. On the right-hand side here, on the middle, sorry, you can see some of the issues around carbon capture, some of the hydrogen agenda, aspects that the government's talking about within its industrial decarbonisation strategy. So the skills, there's the industrial decarbonisation strategy. And then over on the right-hand side, these are some of the primaries and some of the companies that we at the University of Chester are working with in relation to both of these issues, the skills, the industrial decarbonisation agenda. And then I mentioned in the middle there, Macquarie, I think they're going to become, they're already a major player in the UK. They already support quite extensively my local gas network operator Cadence, and I think will increasingly support National Grid as both pursue the hydrogen agenda. If you may or may not be aware, yesterday National Grid put out quite a lot of material in relation to hydrogen. So if you look on their website, the Future of Gas programme, you'll see quite an extensive statement about their future direction of travel, their aspiration to be hydrogen ready by 2025, a hydrogen ready National Grid by 2025. And we're going to see an increasing focus on that particular aspect. Next slide, please. So, focus of today, really, I'm giving you an overview of the industrial decarbonisation agenda. Focus, the skills required for net zero. What are they? What are they? Well, I would encourage colleagues to look at two things at the moment. On the left-hand side, this slide here is taken from some of the material that's emerging from the Green Skills Task Force, which you may have come across, the Green Skills Task Force, which the government has commissioned to do an overview of the net zero skills required by 2050. And then here I've highlighted the north of England on the back of a presentation that I was actually giving yesterday. But in here, what you can see is the 60,500 jobs that are going to be required within the Northwest and the 35,000 jobs that are going to be required within new jobs that are going to be required within the West Midlands area to deliver on this, according to the Green Skills Council. I think that's a pessimistic figure. I think the figures will be higher than this. These may well be new jobs. I think there'll be a lot of reskilling as well of existing employees to almost, how can I put it, retrain to retain within industry. What are the core areas that the Green Skills Task Force are beginning to consider? Well, you can see this from the right-hand side. Offshore wind, hydrogen, nuclear, zero emissions, etc., etc. You can see them all here. For me, in relation to your area, well, what I see is I think there'll be significant opportunities around carbon capture. I think there'll be a lot in relation to low carbon hydrogen initiatives. I think there'll be an awful lot around buildings as well. It will also build upon existing sort of initiatives that have been put in place, which are more sort of demand related and putting in place intelligent systems within buildings, etc. Okay, next slide, please. So, some of my early work. What do we need from the skills delivery system? Well, I could walk through you all of these. I do notice there's a bit of duplication here. It seems as though on the right-hand side of this, that's been reproduced lower down as well. I think the key thing is to make sure there's a geographical focus and availability. So hence the need for issues like CREST, I think, within Shropshire, to make sure that CREST is delivering the very skills that you guys require in relation to this opportunity. That CREST itself is flexible and works with you flexibly, and that you work with them flexibly to ensure that skills are being required. And there's this collaboration and responsiveness between the two. I could go on through this, but I don't really want to. I think one of the key, well, I'll pull out some key bullet points here. I think that just in time is going to be a challenge for both providers and for businesses, the just in time aspirations. You guys are going to find businesses are going to provide that they need a new skill set very quickly. I think it's very right that you should be phoning universities and colleges and saying, in the next 3 months, I'm going to want this, this, and this. Can you provide it, please? And I think for universities and for colleges, it's going to be a real challenge for them to be coming up with micro modules that are bespoke to your particular requirements. But that's the direction of travel. That's the challenge for us. You guys have got the challenge of the legal requirements to be net zero by 2050, or this 85% reduction in 14 years' time of your carbon emissions. We've got the challenge to actually provide you with the training that you perhaps require to deliver on that. Next slide, please. Other challenges, well, I think, as I've already mentioned, the sheer numbers of people that are going to be required in this particular space, but it's uncertain at the moment. That's why I was arguing that there will be a need for both parties to be much more flexible, collaborative and demand responsive to deliver the volume that's required. There's this timing issue as well. The typical training period for a degree program is 3 years. For an apprenticeship, it's 4 years. I think you're going to find that you need skills much more quickly than that, and that may well be a retrain of existing skills, but there may well also be opportunities there to nurture apprenticeships and training skills for things that you see coming along the line. Hence these cluster plans that are being developed, and you'll hear more, as I say, about the Midlands one later on today. Funding. I think there'll be significant funding associated with this for businesses and for universities that are prepared to work together to secure this. For business, it'll be around tax breaks and maybe some incentive funding as well. For universities, it'll be about working with local enterprise partnerships, etc., to ensure that the two are aligned and funding's associated with that. There's also going to be significant funding, as I mentioned, for apprenticeships, boot camps, etc. Finally, I've put down here other. I think one of the key challenges for us within universities, colleges, training providers is to make sure that we're trained. To make sure that we're trained to deliver on the programs, on the initiatives, on the courses that businesses want. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for us, if I'm honest with you. So training the educators is going to be a key issue for us to overcome. Next slide, please. So in terms of the work that Kirsty and I are doing, we're beginning to identify some of the key skills gaps in the area. Carbon capture. Carbon capture is certainly going to be the major mechanism by which we're going to realise the requirements of the 2035 obligations in the 6th carbon budget. The government at the moment is investing heavily in the industrial clusters. I talked about my industrial cluster in the northwest. Other industrial clusters, South Wales, Teesside, Humberside, Southampton, and up into Scotland with Grangemouth. They'll put down anchor projects, such as the one I was mentioning earlier, but there will be outreach then into other areas over the next 10 years. We will see pipelines or systems put in place to transport carbon from other localities, such as Shropshire and the West Midlands. I can see Shropshire and the West Midlands by 2032, 2033 being directly linked to the HyNet proposition within the Northwest, linking industry, linking business parts, etc., around carbon capture. Increasingly, we're going to see carbon capture bolt-ons to business parks, to energy from waste plants, to biomass plants, etc., to capture that carbon rather than emitting the emissions in particulate matter into the atmosphere. And there will be incentives and business models to support businesses around that. So we're going to see an extensive development of carbon capture facilities around the UK in the next 10 years. Secondly, hydrogen. I've already mentioned that I think within 3 or 4 years, we will be consuming hydrogen through the grid, not at 100% to start with, maybe at a 15-20% blend to start with. But there's going to be significant opportunities in that particular space as well. You know, the only emission associated with hydrogen, colleagues, it's water. There's no carbon emissions associated with that. I've already mentioned that I think energy efficiency measures will continue apace. I think they've been the key driver to date with many businesses, but I think they will continue apace. And I think there's a dearth of skills in the area at the moment around the digital technician, digital technologies, etc. I think there'll be more work around that. And I think there'll be a particular focus around value engineering around carbon utilisation. And then finally, for businesses, I think there'll be quite a bit of work around carbon accounting, carbon monetary values, etc., which we're not used to at the moment, but I think we're going to see a significant change over the next 5 or 6 years around that. And those are the sort of skill sets I think that my business school colleagues should be generating courses on, and we are doing. Next slide. So here we go, some of the emerging skills gaps again. General technical, I've already mentioned some of those. I think a key one here I'll pick out is environmental permitting, licenses, planning. Clearly for any applications for land use change, it will have to go through the local planning system. So there will be opportunities there. for some consultancies in particular, because I don't think the local authorities are necessarily equipped to deal with much of this at the moment. And then finances, I think any colleagues on the call involved in financial services, I think we're going to see a sea change in relation to carbon accounting and businesses over the next 12 months, dare I say. So I think there is significant opportunities there as well. And then finally, the whole leadership and management issue around net zero. Colleagues, this is really important. You know, climate change is incredibly important. My government's taking it very seriously, which I'm really proud of. And we are in a climate crisis situation. Local authority after local authority has declared a climate emergency. We do need to change our practices. There will be significant opportunities for those who want to grasp this bullet. Those that don't, you're going to be breaking the law and going out of business, I'm afraid. Next slide, please. Questions. Well, Vicky, if you don't mind, I'm not going to go through these. I know you're going to circulate the pack, and perhaps whilst I talk, I will let people look at these particular questions. But a whole series of issues here that perhaps, Vicky, as you go through the day, you might want to reflect upon or might want to help to inform your discussions during the morning and the afternoon session. So Vicky, at that particular point, if I may, I might sign off. I'm happy to take any immediate questions, but I'm afraid to say, Vicky, as you know, unfortunately, I've got to go on to other meetings today. But I would be delighted to come back and have further discussions with colleagues on the call, should they wish, Vicky, and work with you and work with other colleagues as is required to enable us to deliver the law, and to also realise the opportunities of the law for business in the Northwest and in the West Midlands. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Great presentation. You're actually 2 minutes under because I gave you a bit of extra time. So if you wouldn't mind, we've just got a couple of questions in the chat. There's one here from Helen saying, where can young people age 14 to 20s and their parents find up-to-date and digestible information about potential careers in decarbonisation, green STEM industries? Just because she said she's increasingly involved in STEM outreach and recruitment activities.
Yeah, so Helen, you're going to see an increasing focus coming out from the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Experience, IFATE, around standards and around particular issues. I did mention, Helen, about the issue of training the trainers. I think there's a key issue here, colleagues, to make sure that the teachers are aware of this particular issue as well. Training the trainers is going to be an issue, because I think if you've got the trainers engaged with this, then we'll ensure that the employees of the future are well trained in this particular space. My experience of working with young people, and I do quite a bit of outreach work through my role as a STEM ambassador, etc., is that the Greta generation that you're referring to, Helen, and I hope you don't mind me calling them the Greta generation, they're driven by this, they're passionate about this. Some are cynical about it, but they're very aware of it, and they're crying out for information and data about that. That's why I'm really pleased, Vicky, that we're having this session today, because the University of Chester and Crest are neatly positioning themselves to become a provider of knowledge of choice around this particular space, and to meet the requirements of and the demands of the kids coming through.
Thanks, Joe. So I'll do one more and then we'll jump over to Juliana, just try and keep on to time. There's quite a few coming in. Hi, Joe. Regarding carbon capture, would there be investment in improving the cost parity for SMEs to do this, as opposed to tariffs and offsetting?
Can you say that question again? I didn't quite catch you. Broke up halfway through, and I'm just going to turn my volume up a little bit, although it's already on 97%.
It's in the chat as well. Hi, Joe. Regarding carbon capture, would there be investments in improving the cost parity for SMEs to do this, as opposed to tariffs and offsetting?
So, colleagues, that's a really great question. The government at the moment is doing three things in relation to this. Firstly, it's currently going through a carbon cluster consultation program, where it's looking for the key clusters to come up with their business plans in relation to carbon capture and storage initiatives. Beyond that, it's doing, I mentioned three things, two other things. Firstly, or secondly, it's coming up with, it's developing business models associated with carbon capture and the costs of carbon. Colleagues, last year, I'm trying to remember the name of the group, Frontier Economics it is. Frontier Economics did a study for government on the pricing and costing of carbon and suggesting business models associated with various business models and technologies associated with this. The government's taking it seriously, so I do think there'll be significant tax incentives and tax breaks around this particular space. And I'll come on to the key one in a second. And then secondly, they're also now through the Hydrogen Advisory Council and the hydrogen strategy, hydrogen carbon capture were perhaps the two key themes I was talking about in relation to the industrial decarbonisation agenda. They're also looking at business models in relation to hydrogen as well. So Frontier Economics has done work for BEIS and it is available on the website around business models. It's a good starting point, not quite mature enough, but the Hydrogen Advisory Council is taking that forward. I think there'll be a significant recommendation within the hydrogen strategy to actually deliver a detailed report by the end of this year, so by December 2021, to put into the budget of next year to incentivize businesses around both the hydrogen and the carbon capture space. The key driver for that, colleagues, it'll be contracts for difference. Contracts of difference, in my humble opinion, and it's very simply, contracts of difference is the price you pay now, the cost you pay now for a new technology is this. If you carry on the way you are and do nothing or get a very simple technology, it might be this. Contracts of difference will bridge the two. It will bridge the two. So I think that we will see increasing incentives coming through around this imminently. The government needs to put in place this, and it's pledging to do this because it's a legal requirement. And I'll finish on this point, Vicky, and I've said this several times. It's a legal requirement that by 2035, we have reduced our carbon emissions by 85% on 1990 levels. When I started off my career, it's frightening, but a great opportunity. Vicky, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody, for your questions in the chat and for quite a few direct messages and responses. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there with Joe, and thank you very much, Joe. Enjoy the rest of your day. Joe's presentation has been recorded and will be available later if you missed some of it. And our next speaker this morning is